In the winter of 1916, the Battle of Verdun was not merely a battle. It was a judgment, a harsh decision made by a single man deep within the German high command. This is not a story of ground gained or lost. It is the story of a secret plan, an operation the Germans called Operation Judgment. Its goal was not to break the lines so much as to break the spirit of France. The objective was not occupation, but systematic killing. How could one man plan such a massacre? And why choose Verdun as the death trap that swallowed a generation? This is the secret that changed the war. By late 1915, Germany was close to collapse. It lacked the economic and human resources for a long war of attrition against the combined might of the Allies, Britain, France, and Russia. General Erich von Falkenhayn, chief of the German General Staff, understood this clearly. He believed the only solution was to force one of the Allies out of the war, and he saw France as the weakest link. Falkenhayn was an eccentric strategist who did not trust direct frontal assaults. Instead, he believed in strategic killing. In a secret memorandum, he outlined his plan: we must strike France in a place from which it cannot withdraw. We must inflict such bleeding on the French army that it withers away. These cold words were not metaphor, they were a plan of action. To carry out this diabolical scheme, Falkenhayn chose Verdun. Verdun was more than a town, it was a symbol of French pride and a site of storied resistance. Falkenhayn knew the French would fight to the last man to defend it. Verdun was ringed on three sides by German artillery positions, making it ideal for bombardment and turning it into a death trap. Crucially, there was only one supply route for the French, the Voie Sacrée, the Sacred Way, and Falkenhayn understood that the French would be forced to pour men into the trap along this road rather than abandon their symbol. That was the real cunning of his plan: to compel the enemy to march to their deaths without a decisive enemy assault. To execute Operation Judgment, Falkenhayn assembled an immense force. This was not a normal attack, so much as an unprecedented artillery judgment. German troops. Falkenhayn massed 150,000 German soldiers at the start of the offensive, organized into 12 divisions. German artillery. More than 1,200 guns were deployed, including massive heavy artillery. Ammunition. 2 million shells were fired in less than 9 hours on the first day alone. By contrast, the French defense at Verdun was weak, roughly 30,000 men and a handful of guns, because the French high command believed the Germans would not strike this sector. This enormous disparity in force was precisely part of Falkenhayn's cruel design. The attack of February 21st, 1916 was not an assault so much as a deliberate artillery catastrophe. It began at 7:15 a.m. Over the first 9 hours, German artillery fired 2 million shells across a front barely 13 kilometers wide. Imagine the scene. Every square meter of ground was struck by dozens of shells. Forests were shredded into brambles, concrete fortifications reduced to dust. This was the largest volume of ammunition fired in any war up to that time. The intent was clear: not merely to destroy positions, but to bury the defenders under the wreckage. When the bombardment stopped, there was virtually no one left to face the German shock troops. The French soldiers who survived were stunned into paralysis. German forces under Crown Prince Wilhelm met little organized resistance at first. They advanced almost without fighting because the French first defensive line had literally evaporated. On the first day, 10,000 prisoners fell into German hands. The losses were so vast that German commanders believed victory had been won. The greatest French collapse in those opening days was the fall of Fort Douaumont. This massive fortress, a symbol of French defense, fell into German hands with virtually no fight. By February 25th, the fort was held by only 56 French soldiers, supported by 2 guns. When the German NCO Contra entered with a small party, he found it abandoned. The fall of Douaumont was a crushing psychological shock for France and the greatest symbolic victory for Falkenhayn, reinforcing his belief that the bleeding would soon be complete. The fall of Douaumont awoke French command to the reality of the German plan. They realized the battle was not just military, but psychological and moral. General Joseph Joffre issued strict orders. Anyone who abandons Verdun will be shot. In this desperate hour, the savior was summoned. General Philippe Pétain, a commander deeply respected by the troops. Pétain's mission was not only to seek victory, but to organize the chaos and restore the morale of an army standing on the brink of total collapse. The failure of Falkenhayn's secret plan depended on one thing he never anticipated: the miracle of French logistics. After the fall of Fort Vaux, Verdun became a death trap, reachable only by a single narrow road connecting Paris to the battlefield. This 70-kilometer road was transformed into what would be known as the Sacred Way. General Philippe Pétain realized that saving Verdun would not be achieved through fighting, but through transportation. He ordered the road to become a one-way lifeline, forbidding any movement in the opposite direction. It became an arterial passage, pumping men and supplies into the heart of the slaughter. The numbers were staggering. Over 6,000 trucks passed daily along that road in the following weeks. Every 14 seconds, a new truck entered service. Within the first 7 days of Pétain's command, this logistical fleet delivered 190,000 soldiers and 25,000 tons of ammunition.
These immense numbers were no coincidence. They were a direct, organized response to the German plan. When Pétain, who would later become infamous, took command, French morale was in ruins. Yet Pétain was not a traditional commander. He was both a logistical strategist and a psychologist. Soldiers called him the doctor because he cared more about defense and managing losses than reckless offensives.
His most important decision, the one that slowed France's bleeding, was the rotation policy. Instead of letting soldiers die endlessly in the inferno, Pétain ensured that 75% of the entire French army would pass through the Verdun grinder for a few weeks, then be withdrawn and replaced. The psychological effect. This rotation gave every French soldier hope of survival and a chance to return home. It transformed Verdun from a hopeless slaughter into a symbolic national duty, reigniting morale across France. The outcome. By mid-war, over 2 million French soldiers had fought directly at Verdun. The battle evolved from a mere defensive stand into a mass national sacrifice, one in which almost every French household had a personal stake. Pétain's logistical genius destroyed Falkenhayn's strategy. The German goal had been to bleed France white, but the French kept coming, sustained by that sacred road. Frustrated, Falkenhayn shifted his strategy. Instead of relying solely on artillery, he began a slow, grinding advance, forcing himself to commit more German infantry to direct combat. That decision proved fatal. The German army, now drawn into brutal close-quarters fighting on the hills and forests of Verdun, entered a war of attrition it was never prepared to win. The tide had turned. The bleeding had reversed. Now it was the German army that was hemorrhaging in the trap of Verdun. The fighting at Verdun was never truly about capturing the city itself. It was about the ring of hills surrounding it, each serving as a vital stronghold. These hills became symbols of slaughter, especially Mordum, the Hill of Death, and Hill 304. The nature of combat. The battles on these heights descended into pure madness. Continuous shelling tore the soil apart until the ground itself became unrecognizable. Bodies of soldiers were blown into the air, mixing with mud and shattered rock. Historians later wrote that the earth became granulated with human remains. Daily losses. At the height of the fighting, combined casualties reached up to 15,000 men per day, killed, wounded, or missing. Pétain's rotation policy kept soldiers circulating, but it could not stop the dying. After the shocking fall of Fort Vaux, the struggle shifted to a smaller, yet fiercely defended fortress, Fort Vaux. What followed was a story of courage and despair intertwined. The siege. Fort Vaux was completely surrounded. The battle moved underground through dark, suffocating tunnels as German artillery obliterated the surface above. Inside, the French garrison fought on without food or water. The fight for water. The most haunting episode was that of thirst. The defenders, deprived of fresh water, were forced to drink wastewater to stay alive. They finally surrendered, not to enemy fire, but to thirst and starvation, respect for the enemy. When the French commander, Major Sylvain Raynal, emerged to surrender, the German soldiers saluted him in honor of his legendary endurance. It was one of the rare moments in the Great War when human respect overcame the brutality of combat. Despite capturing several forts, the Germans could not hold their gains for long. Falkenhayn's plan had always been about attrition, not occupation, and this proved to be its fatal flaw: the Somme distraction. By the summer of 1916, the Allies launched the Battle of the Somme, as discussed earlier, a massive British-French offensive designed to relieve pressure on Verdun. This forced Germany to divert artillery and troops from Verdun, weakening Falkenhayn's hammer blow, the end of the plan. This shift marked the final collapse of Operation Judgment. Falkenhayn could no longer achieve his goal of bleeding France white while fighting on two fronts. By autumn, Falkenhayn was dismissed and the French army launched its counteroffensive. The recovery. Within weeks, the French forces recaptured Fort Douaumont and Fort Vaux through immense effort. It was more than a military success. It was a restoration of national pride that Falkenhayn had nearly destroyed. The final symbol. The forts themselves were not worth the horrific human cost, yet their recapture officially marked the failure of Falkenhayn's plan and the enduring resilience of France. After 10 months of brutal fighting, it became clear that Operation Judgment was a complete disaster. Falkenhayn hadn't bled the French army dry, he had bled his own. The German war machine was crippled at Verdun, achieving no real strategic gains. On August 29, 1916, Erich von Falkenhayn was dismissed from his position as chief of the German General Staff. His removal was, in every sense, the final judgment on his plan and the end of his military career. Even Falkenhayn himself couldn't escape the personal cost of his own strategy. His son, who served in the German army, was severely wounded during the Battle of Verdun. When the battle officially ended on December 18, 1916, it left behind numbers that defy comprehension, cold proof of the futility and cruelty of Operation Judgment. French losses: around 377,000 soldiers killed, wounded, or missing. German losses: around 337,000 soldiers killed, wounded, or missing. Falkenhayn failed to make the French bleed more than his own troops. The numbers themselves expose the lie behind his strategy. The casualties were nearly equal, and the gains non-existent. Verdun wasn't a battle. It was a grim reminder that no matter how advanced the weapons become, they can never crush the human spirit when it stands against injustice. Operation Judgment was built on a cruel mathematical formula. If we can kill them faster than they can replace their men, we will win. But Falkenhayn forgot one simple truth: humans are not numbers. The failure of Operation Judgment stands as proof that even so-called genius generals can fall into the trap of arrogance. Falkenhayn wanted to be the judge delivering the verdict, but in the end, Verdun itself passed eternal judgment on him and his plan. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like. It truly helps and keeps me motivated to bring you more.